Hello and welcome. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the political genius of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. You might know them as the Iroquois League. We're going to unpack a system of government that was so advanced, so sophisticated, it actually challenged and even inspired the founders of the United States. All right, let's get right into it. When you think about where American democracy comes from, your mind probably jumps to places like ancient Greece or Rome, maybe Enlightenment thinkers in Europe. But what if I told you that a powerful, working model for a federal republic was already thriving right here in North America for centuries before 1776? So let's meet the Haudenosaunee, which means the people of the Longhouse. Now, this wasn't just a handful of tribes. This was a full-blown confederacy of 6 distinct nations: the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Seneca, and later on, the Tuscarora. They came together to create this incredibly complex political union, all designed for peace, cooperation, and of course, mutual defense.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at their foundational constitution, then we'll analyze the 3 main pillars of their government. After that, we'll explore just how much influence they had on the U.S. founders, and finally, we'll talk about the lessons we can still learn from their political wisdom today.
So, what was the glue that held this powerful confederacy together? Well, it all starts with their foundational document, an unwritten constitution known as the Great Law of Peace. The Great Law of Peace really was the bedrock of the entire Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And get this, it was passed down orally from one generation to the next. It was this comprehensive guide for how to govern. And it wasn't just about stopping wars. It was about creating a lasting structure for justice and social order that would stand the test of time. And what's really amazing is just how detailed the Great Law was. Seriously, think of it like a modern constitution. It spelled out individual rights and responsibilities so everybody knew where they stood. It clearly defined the roles of the chiefs and, importantly, the limits of their power to make sure no single leader got too strong. And it laid out these super careful procedures for making decisions, which we'll get into in a minute. The whole thing was beautifully symbolized by the Great Tree of Peace, where the nations literally buried their weapons to seal their new union. All right, let's get to the heart of it. We're going to break down the Haudenosaunee government into 3 brilliant pillars that, trust me, are going to sound surprisingly familiar: federalism, checks and balances, and consensus-based decision-making. First up, federalism. This is a concept we live with every single day, the idea of sharing power between a central government and individual states. Well, the Iroquois League had absolutely mastered this idea long before the United States was even a dream. And this just perfectly illustrates the parallel. For the Iroquois, you had the Grand Council, the central authority that handled the big picture stuff, things that affected everyone, like war and diplomacy. But each of the 6 nations was completely independent when it came to their own internal business. This balance of shared power and local control is the very essence of a federal system. Okay, pillar number 2. Checks and balances. This is another cornerstone of modern democracy, right? The Haudenosaunee had this absolutely ingenious way of making sure no single leader could ever accumulate too much authority. And that ultimate check on power came from the clan mothers. Now, you have to understand, Haudenosaunee society was matrilineal. That means your identity, your clan, your property, it all passed down through your mother's line. And this wasn't just a cultural quirk, it was the foundation of real political power for women. So while the chiefs came from specific family lines, it was the clan mothers who actually held the power. They nominated the chiefs, they kept a close eye on them, and, this is the crucial part, they had the authority to kick them out of office if they weren't doing their job. That is a profound check on power. So while the U.S. system uses its 3 branches of government to check each other, the Iroquois system used different, but you could argue equally effective methods. You had the clan mothers keeping the chiefs in line, and you also had the consensus rule, which we'll see next, that stopped any one nation from just bullying the others into a decision. And that brings us to our 3rd and final pillar, consensus. And this is maybe the biggest difference from our system of majority rule. In the Grand Council, a decision was not final until every single member nation agreed to it. No exceptions. And this wasn't just a quick vote. It was a very careful, step-by-step process. First, the issue would be debated by the elder brothers, the Mohawk and Seneca. Then it would pass to the younger brothers, the Oneida and Cayuga, for their debate. Only when all of them were in agreement would the Onondaga, who were known as the firekeepers, confirm that a true consensus had been reached and announce the final decision. It was a system built to make sure every voice was heard and that the smaller nations were protected. So, you've got this incredibly advanced political system running smoothly for centuries. And the big question is, did the American colonists notice? Oh, you better believe they did.
Benjamin Franklin, probably more than any other founding father, had tons of direct contact with the Haudenosaunee. He was a diplomat, a printer, living in Pennsylvania. He was deeply familiar with their society and was just blown away by their ability to maintain such a strong, united confederacy.
And his admiration just comes through so clearly in this letter he wrote back in 1751. He says, "It would be a strange thing if 6 nations of ignorant savages should be capable of forming a scheme for such a union, and yet that a like union should be impracticable for 10 or a dozen English colonies." Just let that sink in. In that one sentence, you can feel his frustration with the disorganized, bickering American colonies and his complete awe at what the Haudenosaunee had already built. He saw their league not as savage, but as a real-world political model to follow. And this timeline really drives the point home. The League was a stable political power for hundreds of years before the colonies even started thinking about uniting. So when Franklin proposed his Albany Plan of Union in 1754, which was an early shot at uniting the colonies, many historians are convinced he was directly inspired by the successful federal model he saw right next door with the Haudenosaunee. Okay, let's bring this all together. What are the big takeaways when we put these two incredible political experiments side by side? This table really gives us a fantastic snapshot. Sure, the U.S. has a written constitution. The Iroquois had an oral one. We elect our representatives. Their chiefs were hereditary, but chosen and watched over by the clan mothers. But look at the core ideas. Both systems use federalism to balance central and local power, and both build in these absolutely crucial checks to prevent tyranny. The methods were different for sure, but the goals strikingly similar. So here's the bottom line. The founders didn't just copy and paste the Great Law of Peace into the Constitution, but the Iroquois League gave them something just as valuable: a living, breathing, successful example of a union of states. It proved that concepts like federalism and representative government could actually work in the real world, offering a powerful model right in their own backyard. And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. In a world that often feels so politically divided, what can we learn from a system where consensus was mandatory, where leadership was held accountable by women, and where a union of diverse nations managed to last for centuries? It seems the wisdom of the Longhouse is just as relevant today as it was back in 1776. Thanks for watching.